Hi, I'm Anil Agarwal for Word at Work TV. Joining me today are Tim Barter with the Center on Executive Compensation and Ira Kay with Pay Governance to discuss supplemental pay disclosure. So Ira, let me start with you because first I heard about this concept a few years ago from you. Could you please, for our viewers, describe what supplemental pay disclosure is and how your clients are using this information to link compensation and performance?
So basically, the supplemental pay concept was developed because many companies, probably almost all companies, believe that the summary compensation table numbers are such a mix of current compensation and future compensation that it really wasn't a very good metric, pay metric, for comparing to performance. And that was really what this was all about. And it really became hot during the Say on Pay votes and then the proxy advisors making recommendations, because they primarily use the summary compensation table number. And if you know much about executive compensation, you realize that you can't really use the summary comp table number to compare to performance. So over the years, we have developed realized pay and realizable pay to try to supplement that and to really be what we think is a much better pay variable for comparing to performance. There's two ways you can use realizable pay in particular, which is the one that we were the most involved with, although the conference board, as you'll hear, uses both, recommends both. And that is you can compare your realizable pay to your pay opportunity. So you can say whether if it's higher than the pay opportunity, you should have good performance, and if it's lower, it probably reflects weaker performance. And you also can compare it to your peers, which is very powerful, and it also comes up with a superior analog for comparing the pay for performance to the peers using the summary compensation table. So many companies over the past few years have done two things. One, almost all of our clients do some kind of a realizable pay evaluation versus the peer group to supplement what ISS will do and what they might do on the summary comp table number. And then some of them disclose that they do the study, and some of them put the actual amounts and where they fit in there. Because in the final analysis, what you want to be able to say is that we have aligned pay for performance for our chief executive officer, or NEO. And that would be, we have high realizable pay because we have high performance, or we have low realizable pay due to the fact that we have low performance, but relative to the peers. And that can be a very powerful thing that, in fact, I believe has convinced the shareholders of thousands of companies that, in fact, they have pay for performance. So that's what we were trying to accomplish.
Tim, you have played a significant role in shaping dialogue on this topic, including realizable pay and realized pay. In your opinion, how is this disclosure helping with shareholder engagement as well as Say on Pay results?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And I think that the way Ira described it is right on. The supplemental pay disclosures give companies an opportunity to provide a different context for pay for performance beyond the summary comp table number, which, that's an important lens. It tells what the compensation committee intended to pay. It's an accounting expense, but it doesn't get to pay for performance. So companies will use this in order to explain on the realizable side, as Ira explained, the relative compensation to peers, and also it's a point-in-time measure to show alignment with stock price. Realized pay allows companies to put context around total pay actually received at the end of a performance period relative to the performance of the company over that period of time. So it's particularly useful for companies where you've got a context shift. You've got perhaps performance up or down considerably, a CEO transition, or a strategy shift, and be able to put pay in context for that point in time.
Ira, based on your experience with your clients, what are a few learnings or best practices for companies to consider when they are exploring disclosure of either realizable pay or realized pay?
So the most important learning is that there is no perfect measure for comparing the pay of the top executives to the performance of the company. There's no perfect performance metric either, but total shareholder return is basically has won the game. And therefore, you're going to be making trade-offs. And we thought on the conference board working group that the best goal was to have alignment between the pay period and the performance period. Now that solves a lot of problems, it creates a few problems, and we thought that was, for a comparison to a peer group, that was indeed the best comparison. The second is performance shares are the biggest challenge in that, because you're either talking about a payout of performance shares that didn't occur in the most recent, that wasn't granted during the most 3-year period, or it was granted during the 3-year period, but it's not going to pay out until after. And you're always going to have a tail on that, one way or the other, on performance shares. So again, you make compromises, and we have some techniques. The Conference Board came up with something. We at Pay Governance have a methodology. There's no perfect methodology. And then the third learning is that there are occasions when the realizable pay numbers or the realized numbers are higher than the summary compensation table number. And this is very problematic. I don't have time to really go into all of that. Most companies are, given the media coverage of executive pay and the income inequality debate, that most companies are very uncomfortable putting a larger number in their proxy. I do not have a trivial solution for that, but that is something you need to be aware of.
Tim, as they say, no good deed goes unpunished. So what are the unintended results of this disclosure? As you know, CDNAs are getting longer and longer. Do we run the risk of confusing our shareholders by disclosing one more piece of information that's based on multiple assumptions?
Well, and let me pivot on what Ira just said for a second, because I think that being able to explain your disclosure is the key here. Realized and realizable pay both give the opportunity to potentially tell a more succinct pay for performance story by using a table as opposed to a lot of words. On the other hand, you have to do it in a way that is understandable to investors, and most large investors are sophisticated. They will understand the disclosure, but on the other hand, you've got to make it clear what you're disclosing, and you also need to use it consistently. And where you have high pay and high performance, you've got to explain both sides of it, and likewise low pay and low performance.
How is the Dodd-Frank requirements to disclose pay for performance going to influence companies?
Well, you know, to Ira's point about best practices, there's no requirement currently that companies use a supplemental pay disclosure, and they should do it only to the extent that it helps them tell their story. Under Dodd-Frank, when the SEC comes out and finalizes rules, there's actually 2 steps, a proposed rule and then a final rule, companies will need to disclose the link between compensation actually received, that's the words of the statute, and financial metrics and stock price performance. So companies are going to be required to make this disclosure. And so they're going to have to start considering how that disclosure is going to have to be put together, going to have to start educating their comp committees, and then decide how it is best put together once we know what the SEC's parameters are. And I think, you know, the SEC may be somewhat more flexible in the way they approach this, but time will tell.
Ira, what did the Conference Board working group suggest, and what is the process companies are following to decide whether to disclose this supplemental pay disclosure or not?
So the Conference Board brought together a lot of knowledgeable people in the area, and one of our working hypotheses is we weren't going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so we really tried to come up with something that would be useful. So we came to the conclusion that probably companies should consider, probably do analysis on both realized pay and realizable pay, maybe disclose that they've done that, what the findings were. We didn't really get into whether, in fact, that I can recall, whether we should actually disclose the dollar amounts. As a general matter on that, companies are, in fact, disclosing dollars. I think that needs to be thought through very carefully. But there's many other approaches. You could use an index, you could use percentiles, you could do a picture showing X's with percentiles of performance and percentiles of pay on the Y and X axis. You could use an index, as I said, and I think that you can really tell the story that you have aligned pay for performance, or if you do not, why that is. You gave a grant of options at a trough in this 3-year period or something, and I just think sort of conveying the sense of aligned pay for performance, which our research has shown probably 80 or 90% of companies have alignment. We think that that's sufficient.
In your opinion, is one method, meaning is realizable pay better than realized pay? How should a company, what Ira talked about companies doing analysis, but when the companies are doing it, what are the couple of steps they should take to decide is one method better than the other from their point of view?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Anil, when we were working on this at the conference board, you know, the IRA started in the realizable camp, we started in the realized camp, and I know that for the center, we came to the realization and actually heard from investors as well that they liked to see both lenses. But to get back to your question, and the reason I like to see both lenses is one shows a relative alignment with peers, and the other shows an absolute alignment over time. But to go about it, what story does the company need to tell? What story does the company want to tell regarding that isn't already present regarding its disclosures? Is it absolute performance over a total period? Because there may be large numbers, and is there performance that would show that, or vice versa? Not much was realized, but our performance was low as well. There you have symmetry. On the realizable side, are we trying to show a relative alignment with peers or with stock price at a point in time to show trends over time, over successive 3-year periods? That's what a company wants to look at, and in educating a comp committee, understanding the terms, understanding what the disclosures go for will help come up with a story that makes sense for the company, and maybe both do.
Have you spoken with investors to get their point of view, and what do they prefer?
I've spoken to them in private upon occasion, and the conference board did a major outreach, which was excellent. And they are definitely supportive of the approach we're taking. There continues to be, you know, the perfect being the enemy of the good. You know, what do you do with pensions? What do you do with perquisites? What do you do with stock options that were exercised, that were granted many years ago, and the stock went up a lot and then came down a little bit? And it's very complicated to do comparisons. The thing that I am most worried about with this, and I think the investors, sophisticated investors are sensitive to this, is that even adding in the Dodd-Frank language of compensation paid, which is really close to the realized value, it is not going to be the same thing. And it is not really a number that can be compared to short-term performance for many companies, not because they had bad or good short-term performance, because it reflects much longer time periods of pay, and it is not really viable for comparing to other companies, in my opinion. There's just too many variables. And yet the media are it's going to be another pay number in total, whatever it's going to be, higher than the summary comp table, lower. You know, we don't want to be too duplicative of that. That was one of also the goals that we had in the conference board. So I think I'm hoping that sophisticated investors who are already doing a lot of this, and I think, like, for example, they are not including realizable pay in some of that analysis. I'm sorry, they are using realizable pay. They're not including pensions in that. It's very complicated. I hope it gets simpler, you know, by the end of this process.
Just to dovetail on that for a second, you know, the conference board effort was out there because there are myriad different types of supplemental disclosures right now. Some call realized pay realizable and vice versa. What we were trying to get to is to get greater consensus, reduce the variability so that you have some standard definitions that companies can use as a baseline and then construct their disclosures about those paradigms, those models, so that investors can readily understand what the company is doing relative to these standards. And by that, get greater consensus. You know, it's not unlike what we've seen a little bit with greater clarity in models in executive summaries.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Ira. For Word at Work TV, this is Anil Agarwal. You stay cool, exec comp professionals.